Alright, we'll give this a second to start up again. That was weird. Twitch just wanted to stop. That does happen. Alright, here we go. It's kicking up on my end. Good, good, good. Let's see if Twitch wants to start too. The joys of tech. Looks like it's back. Let us see. Yeah, on my end it seems to be working. Oh, nope, nope. It still doesn't want to work. Let us see what we shall see. It says I'm live. Okay. Nice. Alright, looks like we're back. Hi everybody, sorry about that. Twitch didn't even let me know it didn't want to work. It just stopped working. Looks live again. Yeah. Alright, we're back. Yep. So, welcome to I was in the middle of answering someone's question. I'll upload the video so I don't repeat myself. I'll just upload them both, and then you can just watch that part again. But yeah, I'm unsure when it cut out, but we'll keep going. It should be fine. I don't want to get too far behind. Alright. Now, let's keep going. So what's the conclusion of this? What are some of these principles? Not just like the random ethics, right? Be benevolent, right? Like, but what does benevolent mean when I'm running a government? Like, how do I execute that? Well, that comes, this is on page 32 if you're curious. Basically, to quote D.C. Lau, right? The ultimate purpose of the government is the welfare of the common people, men. And as he says immediately, right? This is the ultimate purpose of government. This is the most basic principle in Confucianism and has remained unchanged throughout the ages. So this is one of the pillars of Confucianism. So, and this begins with satisfying their material needs. So there is still a materialist element here, right? So you have to, like, feed them. So it says, quote, the master says, give them enough food. When asked about government, what's the most important part of government? Feed them. In order to achieve this aim, labor of the common people must be employed in the right seasons. Basically, they should not be taken away from their work in the land during busy seasons. In broader terms, you have to be generous for caring about the people and be just in employing their services. So there we go. We're starting to get principles. So there's inherent justness also required of rulers. So you have to take care of the people. You have to be just. You have to, and then here's two. You also have to. I love this part. Besides necessities of life, the common people must also be provided with sufficient arms, weapons. And then before they can be sent to war, they must also be trained, right? It's immoral to send people to war untrained, which is obvious. It should be anyway. And then Confucius said to send the common people to war untrained is to throw them away, right? And if you care about the welfare, you can't just throw them away. And then he also then gets into, not only is there that training, do I have it on here too? Where's my PowerPoint? Here we go. This includes moral and practical education. Now, he admits right away, this education is not the exact same education the gentlemen receive. So he mentions here D.C. Lau on 33. After a good man has trained the common people for 7 years, they should be ready to take up arms. And he mentions this too, like, food and arms are not the most important thing man should have. Actually, morality is the most important, which is an interesting theory. And then basically all of Confucian teaching, do I have it on here? Yeah. The fundamental baseline of Confucian teaching is moral government. That is the number one role of a government. So in more like Western modern political thought, the fundamental role of the government really is something like protection or welfare. For Confucius, the justification for a government starts with moral well-being. There's a quote here on 33, guide them by edicts, keep them in line with punishments, and the common people will stay out of trouble, but will have no sense of shame. And then, as D.C. Lau points out, compulsion and punishment, at best, ensure outward conformity. The common people will stay clear of trouble, but not because they are ashamed, but because that's just punishment. So then he says, this is the counter to this. Confucius says, guide them by virtue, keep them in line with rights, and they will, besides having a sense of shame, reform themselves. So both with the gentleman and with the common people, Confucius genuinely believed people should be into self-reformation. So people should be moral because being moral is good. So it's best to convince the normal people to be moral. Now, none of this can work in Confucius' system without the ruler being also a moral example. And then he's asked, it says, Qi Kongzi asked Confucius about government. Confucius answered, quote, to govern is to correct. If you set an example by being correct, who would dare remain incorrect? So not only is the foundation of government rule moral, which includes teaching the people to be moral and focus on them reforming themselves, the ruler must be moral to set the example for the people. Now imagine that. Now I point this out because y'all are pretty young, but I don't think it's an unfair question to ask you. In the modern contemporary United States, do we have a moral standard for leadership? Do we require all of our politicians to be moral people in their private and public lives and to be moral examples for everyone? I'll let you think about that for a second. Now, spoiler, in Western political theory and modern political theory, no. In classic political theory, yes. We'll get into some of that. In modern theory, no. Like, you do not have to be... Morality has not a strong connection to winning, right? If anything, you could argue it's more of a team sport. So, I'm Team Red, you're Team Blue. Ah, my team is right. Why? Because we are blue or red. So, imagine we demanded moral leadership. That's something anyway. So, in Confucian leadership, you must be moral. And then there's more quotes here. We come to the following passage. The master said, if a man is correct in his own person, then there will be obedience without orders being given. But if he is not correct in his own person, there will not be obedience even though orders are given. So if you yourself are not correct and moral, if you give orders, people just ignore them. So it's people need the example to follow you. Now, at the same time, is there anything else here I want to... Oh, before I get to this, he does mention too, moral example is far more effective than edicts. And where edicts contradict the example, it is example that the common people will heed rather than edicts. So basically, laws are not as effective as moral examples. And if basically, what is morality, right? Like, it's people's internal sense of justice and right and wrong guiding their actions, not a rule. Because even in the 21st century, folks, where hypothetically the government is watching all the time, the government can enforce its rules everywhere at all times. Can I prove it? Yeah. This is wonderful. We have a wonderful example. My example to you is coronavirus regulations. How effective is enforcement? Spoiler, none. Now why? Well, it's not just that the government's not doing a moral example. The edict itself is such overreach, there is no means of enforcement. Does that make sense? Or even in like LA County, right? When the mayor said, we're going to make the sheriffs enforce, I don't know, the state passed a mask mandate in public at all times. And the sheriff said, no, we're good, we're not going to do that. So, right? So suddenly now you have a rule that doesn't matter. So if you want people to do something, it has to be from their own will. So, and again, that's the basics of Confucianism. It should be, like, people should know why they're doing a thing and then want to do the thing. Again, goodness for goodness sake. All right. Now, at the same time, and there's even more here on moral leadership, but we'll get into that more as we get into the content of the class. Now, common people, generally speaking, in Confucianism, are thought to be we'll say have a slight diminished capacity. This is on 36. You can't talk about the government without talking about Confucius' attitude toward normal people. He did not disguise the fact that in his view the common people were very limited in their capacity. Quote, the common people can be made to follow the path, but not to understand it. Now, he has kind of his tier system here. Let me find this. Yeah, here we go. So he mentions The common people, so far as they make no effort in studying, even after having been vexed by difficulties. Oh, here we go, yeah. So those who are born with knowledge are the highest. Next come those who attain knowledge through study. Next again are those who turn to study after having been vexed by difficulty. The common people, insofar as they make no effort to study, even after having been vexed by difficulties, are the lowest. It is not surprising that Confucius should have taken this view. Study, as conceived by Confucius, is arduous process which can never be accomplished. So it's basically a lifetime of study where there's really no reward except the goodness of it itself. So he just assumes most of the common people won't do it, so they'll just follow the example. So again, this is kind of his idea. And at the bottom here, at the bottom of 36, it does say Confucius may not have had too high of an opinion of intellectual and moral capacity of common people, but it's emphatically not true that he played down their importance to the scheme of things. So even though he doesn't necessarily give them high intellectual capacity, it doesn't matter, right? They're still the fundamental of holding up reality, basically. Right? That doesn't mean that, and he mentions here, basically in Confucianism, you still have to take care of the normal people. They're still the foundation of society, right? The regular farmer is the person that the gentleman is concerned with well-being the most. So this is a very important fundamental of Confucian morality. And then here's another quote, right? Basically here. So the sole test of a good ruler was whether he succeeded in promoting the welfare of the common people. That was the number one thing of what a Confucian ruler was judged by. So if the welfare of the common people was good, they're a good ruler, and if it wasn't, they weren't. That's it. And again, might seem basic, right? But I'll be honest, I think we've kind of lost this in modern political dialects, right? Like, what should be the goal of our rulers? And again, you're like, Professor Science, we'll have rulers. We do. Right, there's people above us who have way more power and try to tell us how to live our lives. We have rulers. So the question then becomes, should those rulers' number one job be our welfare? And welfare doesn't mean a check you get from the government. Welfare means the well-regulation, the well-running of our life. So again, it's probably important. Now real quick, do I have to bring this up? Let's see. I'll bring it up later. Any questions so far? How we doing? I could go faster, but that's okay. I'll drink my drink and then give you all a second. If you don't have a question, it's cool. Looks like our hiccup was just a hiccup. Fantastic. Oh, I see a couple people typing. All right. The student who asked the question from before, I'll upload this. I recorded my answer to your thing, so I'll just upload that bit, and then we can go see it. The worst part, I had a really long answer to that. I'll upload it to a YouTube video, and you can go see it. There's a huge answer to it. So, yeah, I'll upload it all after today. I save them all locally, so even if the stream dies, everything I said is preserved. So when I upload it, probably this weekend, I'll upload this week's stream, and you can just go watch that little bit. It'll be the first, 15 minutes. So there'll be 2 little videos, and I'll upload them. All right. Relation to poetry. Oh, so now we get into the issue of how does one learn, right? If we can cultivate a thing, how does one cultivate it? And you might be like, Professor, why are we talking about poetry? Well, you'll see. So now we're going to start to get into, if we said there's different levels of intelligence or managing people. So, and to quote Lau, right? So far as we looked only at the moral qualities indispensable to a gentleman, and the ideal of a gentleman is wider than the moral man. More is necessary if we are to have the perfect gentleman. So to understand this, we have to understand 2 Chinese terms. And if you ask why I don't have the Chinese characters, I tried to find them, and I literally couldn't do it. I'm still searching. I need to get this book in Japanese, basically. So someday I will. But for now, we have the first one, chi. This is the basic stuff a man is made of. And more specifically, you're born with it. This is your basic composition as a person. So your talents and your character. Next, there's wen, which means something like beautiful pattern. And this one's a far-ranging, difficult application word, but it's something like the beautiful qualities gained in education. So all gentlemen are a combination of these two things. And the quote here, D.C. Lau again, what a man acquires through education covers a wide range of accomplishments. It includes skills like archery and charioteering. So we got a bunch here. Archery, charioteering, writing, and math. Hopefully everybody knows what archery is, but charioteering is riding a chariot, right? Like a wagon with two horses pulling it, used in war. The ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Persians used it, the ancient Chinese, the classical Chinese also used this. It was a very common way of fighting. More like ancient. Classic, when I say like classic, we mean like around 0 AD. They started shifting more to just cavalry. Once you belt the stirrup, it's more effective. All right. Now, the most important of these. Now, why you need them all? The most important was, of course, literature, music, and learning conduct befitting of a gentleman. Somebody says the Ben-Hur scene. I'm so glad at least one person has seen Ben-Hur. Yes. So, in Rome, they had literally chariot races. Aggressive, violent chariot races, for sure. But they no longer use them in war because cavalry tended to be better. Just a guy on a horse with a saddle. But pre-saddle, chariots are pretty cool. But yeah, so one reason we're going to talk about poetry, you might be, Professor, why are we talking about poetry? It's because you literally need these things to make a gentleman. Now, do I have it on here? I don't have it on here. Wait a minute. That's okay. So when we talk about music, literature, contract befitting of a gentleman, the most important thing in ancient China was something called the odes, which was a collection of 300 historical poems that everybody memorized. And we'll get into why they would do that. So, when also could be used to indicate culture in society as a whole. So, learning about, like, common culture. Now, in English, there's some... Lau points out the complicatedness of this translation. So, this can be, when has a meaning of... This has various meanings, meaning ornament, adornment, refinement, accomplishment, good breeding, and culture. So why would we want this? Well, there's a lot of reasons to do this, but generally speaking, it's not enough for a man to be born with good native substance, to quote Lau again. It's a long process to nurture is necessary to give him the breeding that is indispensable to a gentleman. And a quote from Confucius, somebody asked Confucius, the important thing about gentlemen is the stuff he is made of. What does he need refinement for? And then the answer is this: the pelt of a tiger or a leopard shorn of hair is no different from that of a dog or sheep. So there's this idea that refinement is the thing that separates a gentleman from a small man, right? Because there could be a small man, quote unquote, one who is not moral, who was born with good natural, endowment, but then they waste it. So there has to be a separation. It's not just what you're born with, it's what you're born with plus your training. So, and this is a long process, and then the stuff cannot be easily separated from the refinement. So the chi and the wen are very thickly together, and it's very hard to break them. And there's a relationship here he mentions many times between morality and rights. So it's the same kind of thing, right? So there's morality, and then there's the actions you have to take to be part of polite society and religion. Same thing here, right? You need to be born with a certain endowment, but you also have to know the code of behavior, as Lau says, and then, understand how it works. So we're getting now into to be a gentleman, you need good training and good, basic morality. And this is, again, a lifetime process. And we're going to get way deeper into this, don't worry. We're going to get into literature and what it means and all the rest. Any questions so far? We're basically learning how you make the Confucian gentleman right now. Okay, people seem fine. Let's keep going. All right. So then we get to Wen Shi, which I'm sure I'm saying wrong. So if you correct me, my Chinese will still suck. The umlaut is supposed to indicate a down-up sound for the Chinese vowel. So just because I know it exists doesn't mean I say it correctly. So what is this? This is roughly translated to mean literature, and then But in this time, and when we study ancient and classic Europe too, literature also meant, generally speaking, music and poetry. And the influence of subsequent ages oh, sorry, my brain is breaking reading this. So basically, this age's influence subsequent ages and their influence on like how poetry and music was supposed to be viewed. So there's a quote here, and so basically Confucius basically influences 2,000 years of Chinese culture with his kind of observations. So it's really good to keep an eye on it. Although I think I need to fix the wording of that. It just bugs me. So I'll fix it later. So quote, the master said, the Shao is both perfectly beautiful and perfectly good, and the Wu was perfectly beautiful, but not perfectly good. Now when we get to the book on 325 and we go read it, the footnote on this is one reason I love this book, and if you have your book you can go look. I think it's on 71, let me see. When we get into the text, oh yeah, one reason I love D.C. Lau is he gives great footnotes. So he actually explains what the Shao and the Wu are. So Shao, this is from footnote 18 on 71. The music of the Shun, who came to the throne through the abdication of the Yao. And then the next one, the music of King Wu, who came to the throne through overthrowing the Yin by military force. So basically, the moral character of the area that made the music influenced the goodness of the music, which influenced, is it good music? Now, when we say good, I'm going to bring up a wonderful dictionary here. Throughout the course of the class, we will be using this dictionary. If you're curious what it is, it's the 1828 Webster's. Now, good means a lot of things. Now, there's a modern movement where people just say, good is subjective. Good means whatever you want it to mean. What is good? What is evil? Oh my god. Okay, good has a meaning. I'm going to show you what it means. Okay, a couple of the basic ones. Valid, legally firm, not weak or defective, having strength and adequate support. It also means valid and sound. It also means complete or sufficiently perfect and is kind, having the physical qualities best adapted to its design and use, as opposed to bad, imperfect, corrupted, or impaired. And they have an example here, and God said everything that it made was good, behold, it was very good. Or, down here too, having moral qualities best adapted to its design or use, or the qualities which God's law requires, virtuous, pious, religious. It can also mean conformable to the moral law, virtuous, applied to actions. Right? Proper, fit, convenient, reasonable, well adapted to the end. It was a good time to commence operations. He had arrived in good time. So, if you don't know how, and if you look, there's 40 different kinds of definitions. Generally speaking, it goes from most common to least common usage when you're in a dictionary. So a lot of these imply, and again, this is a classic definition, there's a moral law here. Goodness requires a moral law. And just same thing we saw in Confucius, right? When we say something is good, it's implying a conformity to the moral law. And when I say the, I didn't say right? Confucianism is firmly founded in the idea there is a moral law. Like there's a singular moral law, not relativistic moral law. And again, this one is a Western definition because we're speaking English, which is a Western language. For the Western traditional conception, right, it's tied to the idea of God's law. And in the Eastern conception, it's tied to this idea of, we'll call it like Confucian law. Now, eventually, we'll talk about a little bit at the end when we get to Mencius. There is an idea underneath Confucianism where there is like a guarantor of goodness, and in Confucius's time it's more implied, and by like 1,000 years later they actually have something called the Supreme Ultimate, which is basically Aristotle's God. But we'll get to that later. But for now, just know, good means something. So for a Confucius, and the groundwork was set by Confucius, perfectly beautiful and perfectly good is better than perfectly beautiful. And when asked, Lau points this out, if he has to, I'm basically explaining what it means, when you have to choose between goodness or beauty, you should always pick goodness. So for Confucius, goodness is the end, so why wouldn't you pick it? And then, basically he requires music and literature to be perfectly moral, goodness, right, to conform to the moral goodness and to be beautiful. And like I already said, for Confucius, perfect goodness is better than perfect beauty. Wow. So basically, morals don't stop at just how you act, right? So this is when I mentioned unlike a lot of modern philosophy, Confucius is actively trying to figure out, like, how do we make good everything, right? Good music, good government, good people, good families, good men, good women. That's what he's good farmers. He's concerned with spreading this moral goodness to everything. All right, any questions so far? And by the way, I do realize it's 21st century, so odds are at least 10% of you are moral relativists, and you ask the question, what is good? Famously known as the Pontius Pilate question, but if you're a relativist, it's fine. But the point here is to just know Confucius disagrees with you. That's what I'd point out. All right, no questions, let's keep going. So then we get into some interesting concepts when we're talking about art, etc. We get to this idea of wantonness. And I'm even going to show you this word. I love it so much. And this is why we have our dictionary open. Here we go. I love old words. So this should pop up on the stream if we're still alive. We are, great. Wantonness, 1. Sportiveness, gaiety, frolic, somnus, waggery, a sad night only for wantonness, licentiousness, negligence of restraint, lasciviousness, lewdness. So in classical Confucianism, it has this kind of moral condemnation feeling to it. It's almost like wantonness is like unnecessarily, just decadent. That would be another way to say it. So we have wantonness here as a concept, and this basically is things Confucius thought had superficial reflection to the real thing. That's what he means. So they're not perfectly good. They're kind of imitating the good, and he felt that was not that was careful to, one had to be careful of that in art, because otherwise you're just distracted from the good, which is not good. And as we already learned in Confucianism, right, the good is the end of itself. All right, now he basically applies the same rhetorical standards to music. So his moral standard applies to music and art and literature. We already basically talked about that. And he mentions the Quan Chu, there is joy without wantonness, and sorrow without self-injury. So there's this idea in Confucian critique of everything that there's a certain, the theory here is basically an expression of immoderate pleasure is the issue. So yeah, you could look at wantonness as immoderate. So there's a need for right measure, basically. So something that's just too much of something is wantonness, right? And it's not too much of goodness, right? But it's like too much sorrow or too much pleasure is a distraction from the good. And then what's the purpose of poetry in a Confucian point of view? For Confucius, edification, right? To raise things up and to stimulate the imagination. Confucius still thought imagination's very important, but it has to be for the rightness, right? So when you hear like right, it means correct or moral or that kind of rightness. All right. So also, one reason Confucius cared about literature is help, and especially the odes, which we were talking about. It's to help a man speak well. That's the goal. So first, how does this work? Well, first, it helps educate and to make analogies and allusions. Right? An analogy is a story you tell to make a moral or practical point. Instead of just instead of just saying you shouldn't murder, you give an example through a story, right? And now an allusion is a little more complicated. An allusion is when I can make a common base of reference to something we've both watched to kind of have a shortcut in talk. And ancient and modern Chinese, it's full of allusions. Chinese love allusions. Now, generally speaking, up until the modern times, your level of education in East Asian societies was how well you alluded to classics, was how you proved your intelligence. But the better you can make allusions, the better you were considered to be educated, right? Because it's proving you were literate. Men and women, too, by the way. If you ever take my traditional Asia class, a book in there we have is written by a 1,000-year-ago Japanese lady, and she's famous for knowing classical Chinese allusions, which women generally didn't know, and she would, just make men look bad often. It's a really fun book. All right. Also, in ancient China, because everybody's fighting each other, but also everybody's reading the same books, it's useful in diplomacy. So all of a sudden, if you're well read and you all read the same Common Core, right? You're all reading the same classics. You can use it as diplomacy to be a little less on the nose, right? Instead of saying like your king sucks or here's the solution, you can make an allusion to history. We have the example here. Let me see. Actually, I'm getting to the example. Let's not worry about it. All right. Now, it's also, this is great, it's a method for indirect critique in politics. Let me find D.C. Lau's example. And this is still, and he mentions, for this reason, such practices have continued to the present day. So it's important political systems where offense given to those who are in power can easily get a man in serious trouble. Classic China and modern China, you can make the argument for both of those. So there's an example here in the Analects of this. So Prince flees after an unsuccessful attempt to kill someone, the notorious wife of his father, and then when the person dies, this person tries to take over his family land again. And then so somebody wants Confucius's opinion on this. This is on 42 if you're curious. So somebody wants to know whether Confucius supports this guy. But since both he and Confucius were visitors in the state, it was not fitting for them to be seen openly discussing the politics of the state. It's rude, right? Because you're basically discussing, should we overthrow the government of the state? That's called sedition. It's still a thing. And if a straight question was put to him, Confucius would of all likelihood refuse to answer. So how'd they do it? This is on 43 if you're curious. Do I have it on here? I don't have it on here? Oh man, I thought I put it in here. That's okay. So for example, this is on 43. The guy's name is Sukung, and he asks, he says, hey, I'll go figure out what the master thinks. So then he went and said, quote, what sort of men were Po Yi and Shu Qi? And then the answer of the master is, they were excellent men of old. And then the question back was, did they have any complaints? And the Confucius says, they sought benevolence and got it. So why should they have any complaints? Now, we have a whole paragraph here explaining how this works out. And I'll read it just so we can kind of get an idea of how things worked in this period. And again, this is why we're reading the intro. There was not a word about Wei, but Su Kung was satisfied that he had gotten the answer. He came out and said, the master is not on his side. So why do we know that? How the heck do you get that? Well, Po Yi and Sui Chi were the sons of a lord of a place. The father intended Sui Chi, the younger son, to succeed him, but when he died, neither of the sons was willing to deprive the other of succession, and they both fled to the mountains and lived their lives of recluses. So by approving of this, and their attempt to yield succession to each other, Confucius was implicitly disapproving of the guy who was trying to overthrow the government, who was enraged in an unseemly struggle with his own father for the throne. So he was fighting with his father for the throne because he wanted it. So this is Confucius's way of indirectly saying, I do not think the rebellion is prudent. And until today, this is still how you critique the government in China. By the way, there's a reason the government of mainland China has to, the Tricoms have to spend, I think they have 500,000 full-time internet censors. It's because literally the language of Chinese is built to talk around politics. So you can critique the government without ever saying anything about the government. That's how classy Chinese is. You can really work your way around it. And this has been done for 2,500 years. So it's a civilizational skill. And again, this really aggravates Westerners who don't understand it. They tend to think like, wow, East Asians never complain about politics. They are so docile. My short answer to you is, you've never been to East Asia and met the people, have you? They are not docile. They critique their governments. They're just different about it, right? Like they're prudent, right? They disagree too. They just have a different way of expressing it. They just don't go on the street and start yelling profanities, right? They're much more roundabout. And when necessary, they will do the profanities thing or complain in public. All right. And now, why is this both good and difficult? Well, it requires knowledge and intelligence and requires a common basis for comparison. We all have to read the same things. So, if we're all memorizing a book of, if the classic Chinese canon, we'll talk about it more as we go forward, it's basically 4 books and memorizing the odes. If you did that, you were basically memorized the canon. Oh, there's my other kid crying. My 6-week-old daughter is hungry. So, welcome to the teaching at home, everybody. So, It requires knowledge and intelligence. And as we already learned of Confucius's idea about normal people, right? Most normal people won't be doing this. But at least gentlemen will be part of this. And gentlemen running the state, so that's fine. All right, any questions about this so far? We got about 10 minutes left, so I'd like to finish. But if you got a question, type it at any time. The last section we're going to do is on learning and thinking, I think is what I called the other slide. And D.C. Lau points this out too. This part is basically ignored by Western academics. I think it's ignored by all academics. Hold on. Yeah, as he says, it's neglected by scholars who write about Confucius. So Chinese, everybody. So his kind of epistemology. How do we know what we know? How do we learn? So we're going to get into this a little bit. So there's two kinds of learning for Confucius. So there's learning, xue, and thinking, su. But I don't know how to say it right. He has a double S. My Wade Giles is rusty, so I'm not going to say that right. So there's a big difference in classical Chinese between learning and thinking. Now let's get into learning. What is learning? To translate to English doesn't really work. It's a hybrid of learning and studying. More like learning, but it's, like I'm learning in school, but I'm studying French, right? So studying French is learning, but not all studying is learning in a Confucian sense. It is closer to learning in general. Something like, it makes a man acquire a new skill and makes him a better person. So remember how we talked about everything in Confucianism is about goodness? Same thing with learning. Part of learning makes, just learning by itself is a moral act, and your job is a moral act. But also, along with this, being moral itself is also a skill. We'll come back to this when we get to the Greeks, too. The Greeks have a theory similar to this, which will be very interesting. All right, so now, learning for Confucius is focused on wisdom of the past. And we have a quote here on 45. There's a couple, actually. So, for example, we have, the master said, I heard it said, gentlemen. I've heard it said, a gentleman gives to help the needy and not to restrain the rich in style. And not to maintain the rich in style. The next one. Chien Supai said, I have heard that the gentleman does not show partiality. Does he show it nevertheless? Next, Su Xia said, I have heard it said, life and death are a matter of destiny. Wealth and honor are dependent on heaven. So this I have heard it said is kind of and to see, these are kind of the kind of difference between learning and practice. It's just a style focus. And we got on 46, we got a whole page of these, my goodness, if you're curious. So, for example, Confucius said, what I've heard is that the head of the state or noble family worries not about underpopulation, but about uneven distribution. Not about poverty, but about instability. Right? So it's this section is kind of teaching you how this rhetorical style works. So there's a connection between learning and putting into practice, which one has heard is clearly brought in the following passages. He gives many examples. So, for example, before he could put into practice something he had heard, the only thing Sulu feared was that he should be told something further. Or, the master said, it is when these things cause me concern, inability, when I am told what is right, to move to where it is. So, we're kind of learning how this process works. Now, there's a strong connection, as all of these indicate, between learning and putting into practice. So a learned thing you do not practice is not in fact learned in a classical Chinese sense. Right? If you quote-unquote learn something and you can't do the thing, you didn't learn the thing. That would be a Confucian way of looking at learning. And then also, he makes a point too, and Lau points this out, that when ruling, right, the role of a gentleman, eventually you rule, you can't put every rule you learn into practice. It's impossible. But when in doubt, you put into practice what is good. This word is back again, right? That's why we defined it. Not what is doubtful. So again, we're focusing on morality and practice. And then, this is important too, because later, this is the interesting part, for 2,500 years, Chinese civilization read Confucius in full. They didn't edit it. However, they sometimes may have ignored certain parts of it. Why? This is what Confucius points out, one of his main principles. Nothing is right just because it is a precept, right? Just because you are taught a rule doesn't mean the rule is righteous. Right? Every rule is not a righteous rule qua rule, right? Just because it's a rule. Rule qua rule is not a justification for rule. There has to be rightness in rules. Everyone's like, whoa, this is hardcore. So what's the second half of this? Well, the second half of this then, how do we go from how do we know if a precept, once we learn, right? We learn rules and we learn morality, how do we know what, is the righteousness of a rule? Well, that's the category of thinking. Now, thinking can be important but a waste. Confucius actually has a quote here, it's pretty funny. I once spent all day thinking without taking food, and all night thinking without going to bed. But I found that I gained nothing from it. It would have been better for me to spend the time learning. So thinking is almost like daydreaming or contemplating, but it's a different category. Now, we still do need, what does thinking do? Well, the function of thinking is something like, the useful function, I would say, or the good function of thinking in a Confucian system, is a critical look at the rites, aka tradition. And we have this on 47, and the exegesis for it on 48. We're almost out of time, but I want to do this. This is on the bottom of 47. Quote, the master said, a ceremonial cap of linen is what is prescribed by the rites. Today, black silk is used instead. This is more frugal, and I follow the majority. To prostrate oneself before ascending the steps is what is prescribed by the rites. Today, one does so after having ascended them. This is casual and, though going against the majority, I follow the practice of doing before ascending. So basically, when you went up a big flight of stairs, you had to prostrate yourself. This means you bow to the ground, or genuflect if you're a Catholic and know what that means. So these are two things. So if you were a Confucian scholar, you had to wear a certain cap. I'll show us a picture next time. So there's two. So the rules say one type of material, and kind of practice is a different kind of material, and he goes with the material that is cheaper, right? So the principle is frugality. The second one is to go up steps. This normally implies all steps, but especially steps around the imperial palace. You're supposed to bow at the bottom of the steps, and nowadays everybody bows at the top of the steps. He still bows at the bottom of the steps because it is the more serious, less casual answer. So in one case he goes with the majority, and in one case he goes against the majority. Why? Because of the principle. Now if you notice too, there's a subtle hint here as well. The majority has no righteousness. Just because everybody does something does not, in fact, make it moral. That should be obvious, but because we live in a democracy, sometimes people forget, right? If you watch, I don't know, any news ever, they always love to say 51% of people think X. You should always ask, so what, right? From a moral perspective, does that matter? Confucius would say, of course not. All right, now. Rights, so the principle here is rights should always be measured against rightness, correctness, goodness, right? So any practice that is done, we should respect the historical practices, or especially Confucius would say, you should respect the historical practices, but you also should compare them always against rightness, which seems logical. And then we get examples of 48, 49, of some kind of how the dialectic works, like how this examination works. Are we almost out of time? I think we're out of time. All right, I'm going to leave it here, actually, because I want to finish this and give us a little time for questions. So I'm going to leave us here on examples of how this dialectic, the search for truth, works. So we can then next time, we're starting to analyze Confucius. So the reading for next time, we're actually getting into the main of Confucius. If you haven't started that yet, that's what we're doing for next class. And if you haven't read 48, 49 yet and gotten to the dialectic, start to get into it. Just a little bit, like how do we analyze these for rightness? And then I want you to read Confucius. If you haven't looked at it yet, this is not a hard read. Like, most of the sections are one little line. Like, let me give you an example. This is 21. This is a book 15:21. The master said, what the gentleman seeks, he seeks within himself. What a small man seeks, he seeks in others. So as you read this, I want you to take notes. On what, though? Take notes on what does this stuff mean, right? Like, and practically, what does it mean? We just talked about how Confucian learns. Like, how is it good, aka moral, and how is it functional? How does it make people act? So as you write, take notes on that. We will be discussing it next class. So if you have any problems or questions, I'll answer them in the Discord. For everybody who's just watching, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. I will upload the full uninterrupted lecture on YouTube within the week. So for that question that we missed, I did actually answer the whole thing, which is depressing. But I recorded it. So it'll be up on YouTube by the weekend. So, all right. And the one person who had that question, yeah. And if any other questions, I'll be happy to answer. Besides that, thank you for watching, everyone. I'll see you all next class. Have a great day.